How do you raise millions of dollars for your next big idea?
You should really ask yourself the question of, why do I want to start a company?
Meet Anders, tech founder and venture studio owner.
I think a lot of people, they get into this decision fatigue moment where there's so many businesses out there that you could build, and sometimes you're worried about the competition. Like, think about where you've built your network and what you're really good at.
Today, Anders gives a masterclass on finding the right business idea, hiring great people, and getting investors on board. If you've been trying to jump into entrepreneurship, this episode's for you. Welcome to Money Talks. My guest today is Anders Bill. Did I say your name right?
Said it right.
Okay.
Last name Bill.
Bill, that's a great last name. Founder of Superfiliate, previous founder of Darkroom, and maybe some other stuff I don't even know about. But
maybe some stuff I want to forget,
Okay, I'm happy to have you on because it's just, we can just have a business entrepreneur jam. I feel like a lot of people want to start businesses and they go, I don't know where to start. I don't know how to pick an idea. You're pretty like structured in terms of how you think, seeing how we've talked about stuff. So how do you decide on a business idea?
I think before even doing that, you should really ask yourself the question of, why do I want to start a company? I think it's become trendy to want that and to want to be in the entrepreneurial journey. And the truth is that there's plenty of great people doing amazing jobs at a company and they're not founding a company. And I think that's actually really undervalued. There's almost this pull, and we see this in Los Angeles. There's a lot of people that quit their job and want to go, start this business, and maybe they raise a little bit of money and friends and family, and they go on this crazy intense journey where I don't think they could have answered the question of why. That's a little tangential. When you're actually in the place where okay, I know I want to start a business. I want to get into it. I'm someone who thinks on the more opportunistic side, meaning you've already spent the last 10 years of your life building up goodwill with certain amounts of people. You know your interests. I think a lot of people, they get into this decision fatigue moment where there's so many businesses out there that you could build, and sometimes you're worried about the competition. Think about where you've built your network and what you're really good at and what you're not really good at. Right. And what you're not really good at will probably be what your co-founder is going to need to do, what your team's going to be able to do. And then you have to choose your industry. Right. And I think you and I were talking about this, which is, I always recommend doing this exercise where you choose 3 to 5 companies that are in the ecosystem today that have been created in the last 5 to 10 years. And you say, I would have loved to run that company and been the founder of that company, and really break out why it's a great business, from a business model perspective and sustainability perspective. Also making sure that it's not just a good business that's raised a bunch of money, but that's actually doing well, and that you'd be really proud of the product for running, right? Because I think there's a lot of people that are running businesses and they become a victim of the business a few years in. You're running the company and you're like, do I want to be here? I've raised a bunch of money. I have all these employees now. And you probably didn't do that exercise. So I would say don't rush. And then I would probably initiate some type of process. And we've done this at our venture studio that I help run called Venice Ventures, where we do a go, no-go process. It's 90 days. You choose the topic. You go all in. You research the market, the industry, the other players in the space. And you really try to build stakeholder buy-in within the market to see is this real? Does this have an opportunity? Instead of just going for fundraising, going for, get that first employee. There's a really big go, no-go process that I think people undervalue.
Yeah. So would you think of it in terms of what's hot, what's trendy, or would you more be what's my passion? What's, what am I good at? You said kind of a bit of both, but I could see both arguments because, a lot of, especially venture capital stuff, it's what's the market have an appetite for? What do investors want to put their money? Let's build something around that. That can work really well. But also, like you said, what are my competitive advantages? What am I actually interested in? Yeah. How would you think of that?
I think the passion side is extremely difficult. I think most people don't know what they want to do. Even people that you think know what they want to do. You're looking at someone running the best company in the world, and I think you and I have met some of these people where they're running an amazing business and they themselves are maybe burned out, or they turned their passion into this amazing profitable company, and it's not what they thought it was. And so the passion side, I think it's important you have a passion for a component of it. My passion is to build teams that are really excited to show up to work, and that are really excited to build software and product and design, rather than being focused on the market or the product being the passion itself. That's just me. And you have to ask yourself what makes you tick. Yeah. The trendy side is interesting. I think the trendy side, sometimes the trend can be a tailwind or a headwind. Like, let's just take crypto, right? Crypto, it was a tailwind for the first 2 or 3 years when it was really exploding. And this is like, the first 2 to 3 years, meaning the first 2 to 3 years where a lot of venture capital money is going in, like that became really trendy and it was a tailwind. But all of a sudden, when you hit this like massive collapse of the ecosystem, it's a huge headwind, right? And so the trend can be the thing that's pushing you into market, but it will also be the thing that could totally suppress you as a company and you become the pariah, because venture capitalists are on cycles, right? There are hype cycles, overcapitalization, right? It was a hilarious cycle we just went through, right? It was this crypto. You went from like the creator economy to crypto to AI, and you're seeing this now. We already have a huge bubble of AI companies that are probably doing things that are more one-off projects, and those founders would probably have been better off not raising traditional venture capital, really being focused on building an amazing product and a good business model. And by the way, building a business that's like a $20 to $50 million valued business. So maybe they're doing 2 to 5 million a year in revenue rather than going for the venture capital scale, right?
The crypto thing was funny. Like, there was so many companies that just raised off being like a crypto adjacent company. And like, some of the ideas were so stupid. I mean, I invested in a lot of crypto stuff, a lot of crypto companies, and I mean, just hearing some of the pitches and what people were actually successfully raising money on was just crazy in that year period. And yeah, it's like funny. It's like it works when everyone's just trying to get a piece of the action. So like you're like, yeah, I'm doing like a media company with a crypto aspect to it, and we also like, it's like what?
It's like not the product. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, what does crypto have to do with that? But like they literally were able to raise money, and then like, yeah, a year later when it's like, oh, we're gonna run out of money. No, but this idea is completely doesn't make sense,
Yeah.
Crypto itself hasn't even proven that it's like a real thing in a lot of ways, and people are like raising to do like things on top of crypto, and it's like, yeah, so you kind of see
infrastructure companies going public.
Yeah,
and like what is
you see the downside. I think an interesting thing about the passion conversation is like people like, I think it's cool, chase a passion, do something around what you're passionate about, because at the end of the day, like, success is longevity. Like, if you can stay in something a long time, you're going to be successful, and being successful is doing something for a long time. So if you're not into it, you're not going to be able to hit that longevity. Like, if somebody is obsessed with sneakers and they build a sneaker app, and someone else is like, sneakers are hot, that's the trend, I'm going to build a sneaker app. Like, the guy who's obsessed with sneakers is going to want to do that through the bear market, through the when it's not the trend and all that, and do it for 20 years. So like, I think that, but at the same time, I think you can become like obsessed with, people like things that they're good at. So like, if your business is making money and you feel like, I did a good job, has a good result, you're going to keep wanting to go in it, and that compounds. And like, people kind of ignore that a lot. They're like, well, I'm not into like, microphones. I don't want to do a microphone company. But if you start making millions of dollars a year selling microphones, you're going to like microphones.
And you can find value in it too. You're like, oh, I love being around, like if you're selling microphones, you're an enablement tool to creators. And it's like this tangential opportunity to get to know the people buying your product. Like there are so many ways to etch into this. And I think you and I have fallen backwards on some of our better ideas or companies and been kind of opportunistic and been like, hey, look, this is a good opportunity here. Rather than being, I think a lot of people toy in the first like months where they're like, oh, I want to do this. I want it to be aligned with X, Y, or Z. And you have an idealization of what it's like.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just never that.
I heard the native deodorant founder on a podcast, and he was like, people were like, what do you know about deodorant? And he's like, nothing, but in 6 months, I'll know everything there's to know about deodorant. It's such a good lesson. It's like,
I love that.
I love that, because like so many times people are like, wait, you're not that guy. And it's like, I'm about to be,
Right. It's you. It's so funny you said that. We had a friend of ours who used to say this, where 3 to 6 months in, if you've been putting everything into it, you are one of probably a couple thousand people in the world that have as much context as you do. If you like talk to the right people in the industry, you understand where that thing is being made, the ingredients in, like you are part of a very small group of people on earth that know as much as you do about that topic. It's crazy.
And you can learn so much so fast these days.
Yeah.
So to talk about Superfiliate for a second, where'd that idea come from? Was that opportunistic? Was that like a trend thing? Like, just want to hear the origin of that. And
yeah, so like the TLDR on Superfiliate is, we are a word of mouth platform that serves e-commerce merchants. So mainly in like the Shopify ecosystem, we power end-to-end affiliate, influencer, ambassador referral programs. And we also automate the creation of co-branded landing pages for a brand's best creators. So let's just say Athletic Greens and Andrew Huberman are partnering. We'd be the technology that tracks all the conversions that are coming in from that show, but we also automate the front end. So you click on that link from the show notes in the podcast and you go to that page, right? And you see Huberman there. He's got his curated products. And I think for us, what we saw in the market was kind of two things. There were a lot of like macro headwinds in the ecosystem where iOS 14.5 came up, which was like the privacy update. It basically made it really hard for people to invest in Meta with the same return. And so that macro headwind meant that companies were going to get smaller. There were going to be layoffs. There's going to be consolidation in their tech stack, and they're going to look for softwares that provide consolidation. And so we started looking at the word of mouth ecosystem and saying, hey, a lot of these companies have 3 or 4 pieces of software for referral, for affiliate, for influencer, but the core technology in the back end is the same. It's like a link and code CRM where you're matching conversions. If you're a customer, maybe you're getting paid in store credit. If I'm a creator, maybe I'm getting paid in cash or upfront payments, right? And then when you do that, you have consolidation as one of your value props, but you have other players in the space that have been in there and have really big install bases. You have to have a wedge, and like that's our co-branded landing page where we saw the best teams in the ecosystem doing something that didn't scale, right? And so this came from investing in the ecosystem, just being like personally passionate about CPG products and like my own health. And then just seeing that like a lot of merchants were struggling to build a best in class experience. You'd go from an amazing, engaging social media post to a shop all page, with like 70 products on it. And like that creator was cut out of that buying decision, right? Creators are only becoming more and more important. So more to your question, was it opportunistic? I think it was opportunistic. It was more built backwards, off of the macro climate. And we also saw some acquisitions happen in the space, which I think is something that people should really consider, which is there liquidity in the market, right? You're only going to make money. There's like 3 ways to make money out of a startup, right? It's cash flowing a bunch of money and you don't have a ton of investors, so you can take cash out of the business. You sell it, acquisition wise. And if you actually are going to make money on an acquisition, you probably haven't raised so much money and you're like, don't have a ton of investors who have a really high preference stack who get paid out first, or you go public. There are so few companies that go public. Then there's so few companies that have built amazing cash flow without investors. And so I think that there's this new age of companies that are going to be in the like 20 to 200 million acquisition. And if they fundraise accordingly, those founders and those teams will do amazingly well. If they overcapitalize, they'll make no money. So like we saw some of those macro trends going on in the market and kind of fundraised accordingly and built the product accordingly as well.
So yeah, it's interesting. Talk about fundraising. You guys raised 3 million seed round.
We raised 2 different rounds. So we did a pre-seed. We initially started because I come from like a bootstrap background, and my co-founder and CEO is from a venture capital background. So we spent 7 years in the VC side. I was like, let's bootstrap, and I realized very quickly that like we didn't want to put our own money in. This was a business that needed some capital. So
the decision was very like, this could be X size. This is not like a little side cash flow thing. This could be big enough that it's worth going out and raising money for. That was kind of...
Yeah, and understanding that it's not binary, meaning you can raise... It's not like a binary decision that comes up. People say, do you bootstrap or you fundraise? And I actually think there's a lot of investors out there that are looking at their returns and realizing that if their founders and themselves were thinking about medium-sized exits from the beginning, they would have capitalized accordingly. So we raised like $1 million in a pre-seed round, and that's like, you're selling the dream. And then we raised a $2 million seed round like 8 months ago or 9 months ago. And the plan is to never raise another dollar. I don't want to raise another dollar for the business. I think we can at different moments if we want to be opportunistic, but like we have the majority of that capital still in the bank. And we're really focused on profitability and making the product great and doing product-led growth.
So there's so many misconceptions about raising money. Like people... It's very celebrated, I find, where it's like, not that it shouldn't be celebrated, but it's like, that's kind of the start of the mission, right? Like you go raise money. It's like, okay, now we got to like work for years to maybe have an outcome. And it's sort of talked about in media, like, bravo, you raised money, Forbes 30 under 30, you made it.
You're going to want their money back, The investors want that money back.
For the most part. So yeah, what's kind of some misconceptions about raising money? So you guys, you raised 1, then 2. So you have 3 million in the bank. How does that all work?
I guess from what angle for you? From wanting to run a company that's sustainable, or like, just a general overview of the market?
I guess for you guys, so it's like, so you go pitch. How does the whole process? How does it come?
The whole process. Yeah. Okay. So I was very lucky to have my co-founder in this process, who's just he's always been on the other side of the table, right? And I think in the beginning, in the same way that I just walked you through why we built Superfiliate in the way we did, you're telling a story, right? You're telling a story to the investors that you're also going to tell to the market and to your future customers, and ultimately for them to be selling to their customers on. So the story is the number one thing. In the pre-seed round, you're going off of usually $0 in revenue. And so the best pre-seed investors are really kind of betting on the people and their ability to articulate the problem and solution space, right? So I think a lot of people, you'll get the like classic founder who's great at telling the story, and then there's not a lot of punch behind it. And that happens a lot, but also that's what makes the ecosystem amazing. Like there has to be a lot of those people selling the dream. And then again, you're selling the dream well before you're even making it. So they have to be good at going into an investor meeting and making them have high confidence that they're going to be able to do what they just told you they're going to do. And those pre-seed investors know that. They know that you don't have a bunch of revenue in there. The seed round is where it starts to get a little bit interesting. The joke is kind of like your revenue can actually hurt you there. There are some companies that are like pre-revenue that get to a seed round and have crazy valuations because you don't have data points to value the company on. We were already in market. We had like some revenue that's coming in there. We benchmarked more after like what the market standard was. So companies coming out of YC will raise on a $10 million safe, right? It's a simple agreement for future equity. And the $10 million valuation is a number that quite literally is pulled out of thin air. You know, it's like that team is great. It's a $10 million valuation, you know, and that's kind of pulled out of thin air because it's the market standard at the moment. And you're seeing now in a more negative market that the original valuation coming out in the pre-seed space gets lower and lower. Same thing with seed. Series A and Series B, totally different. Those ranges can get way crazier. And that whole fundraising market is like probably a whole separate discussion. But pre-seed and seed is usually relatively insulated from the macro trends because they're always betting on the dreamers, you know, and it's such a great position for those investors. They get the 5% stake in the Meta or the whatever company is going to have a huge outcome, and they have asymmetric outcomes, but they also have a lot of their portfolio companies go to zero.
Yeah, it's funny what you said, like the revenue can actually hurt you. It's so backwards, but it's basically like if you're like just starting and pitching this dream, it's like we could be the next Facebook. And then it's like, you know, even if it's a 0.1% chance of being a $1 trillion company, if you start calculating that, you're like, okay, I just want to get in, right? But then if you kind of start and you're like, yeah, now we have revenue, but it's like, you know, $18,000 a month. It's pretty hard to think, well, that could be a $1 trillion company. It's like, oh, well, if you valued it on $18,000 a month business, you'd be like, yeah, it's worth $400,000. So like, how much of a markup are we going to have? So yeah, it's interesting that, you know, it can actually move you backwards. What do you think the biggest misconception is of raising money?
That raising money is a milestone to be sought after. I think it's the headlines are always this company raised that money. And I think a lot of people are chasing the headline and not thinking thoughtfully around what are the implications on the business. You can actually raise around, and sometimes I see this in the headlines, X company raised $10 million at an X $100 million valuation. That actually can ruin the company. You know, so all of a sudden employees have their options valued way higher. It's like kind of maybe you have a higher preference stack, meaning the investor gets paid out at a higher multiple. And maybe it was unreasonable, the like multiple they put on revenue. Like, let's just say it was 100x multiple on revenue and they never catch up to that. And so I think the biggest misconception is chasing the headline. And I would say the other one is thinking that the investors, it's an interesting leverage situation. A lot of times when you're interviewing someone to join your team, the moment you want them to leverage switches, right? They're like, oh, I want, you know, I'm thinking about this, you know, like I want this in here. Like I think this type of bonus matters. The same thing on the investor side. Like you're actually, and we were very clear with our investors, this isn't us pitching you, like it's you pitching us, but also it's, and not to be arrogant, like it's just a mutual relationship. We're building a relationship. Like I don't want you to just give me cash and then we do the check-ins, and then if things aren't going wrong or things are going wrong, you're stepping in and firing the team. It's like, how are we building a relationship over time and enabling each other to bring the most out of the venture?
Yeah. So people think that it's like you land the money, now you're rich. When in reality, it's like you got to go make that money work. And
there's a dark part of the story too, which is like in the last 2 years when the market was really crazy, a lot of founders took secondaries. So secondaries as a concept, for some of your like listeners and watchers, I think like it's worth jumping into. Founders can take secondaries in some of these rounds, like Series B. Let's just say you raise $100 million valuation. A founder may negotiate taking $5 million personally. And it's a really interesting incentive flip where the founder then, ironically, if they're going to take secondaries, if they're not looking out for their employees, will try to raise as much as they can at a high enough valuation to take the most amount of money in secondaries. We actually saw a lot of companies raise it way too high a valuation, and they took $10, $20 million off the table. A lot of times those founders leave within 2 years. A lot of times they put their feet on the table, or like they just were not thoughtful around how that affected the rest of the company. And so, and also that's on the investors as well for playing into that.
It's kind of messed up in a way. Like, it's like you don't finish your job, but you take like a couple mil or whatever off the table.
Well, it's great. Secondaries are great if done responsibly, right?
Yeah.
Because the founder has taken an asymmetric risk. Like it's almost unfair that a founder has to take an asymmetric risk for so many years. And so I think secondaries can be a beautiful thing. And maybe it's they're 10 years in and they haven't bought a house yet, and they're like, the company's doing well,
right.
But it's like, how much are they taking, and is the valuation reasonable on what they're raising? And that's the question. So secondaries as a concept is actually beautiful and great, but it just got hyperinflated, as all these things do.
Yeah, I've heard investors say like some investors like when founders take secondaries because it's like, let's say you have a guy. So there's the salary component too, right? So when you raise money, like then as a founder, you're usually taking a salary. So you're like making some money. It's not like you're like starving, like starting, right? Like once you raise money, like for you guys, I'm sure you take salaries and you can like live nicely relative to a lot of people and all that. But then it's like, yeah, let's say a company is now doing really well. And like you said, the founder's 10 years in, still living at the same salary that's like, let's say, way below relative to being the CEO and founder of a big company. So then it's like, if it's, let's say now $100 million company, they give the founder $1 million, it's a lot of money for most people, but it's not in line with like the giant exit. So they're still really hungry, but now they're kind of not worried personally about like paying rent and like eating at restaurants. And then they can like relax and go for the $1 billion exit or whatever. I think that's kind of the framing of it. Coming from like my background of just like bootstrapping everything, and like I still find it crazy like to think about. Like it took me like years and years to get to a point where my businesses were making what a startup founder salary even would be, right? So it's like crazy to think like, oh, you can just raise money, take a salary, live pretty nicely, and then if it hits, you get $20 million. If it doesn't, you made a good salary for 10 years, which is not so bad.
Yeah. And the bootstrap, I think the bootstrap life is so painful. Like you've never, like the concept of a 401k or insurance covered by your company. Like, what does that even mean for me on the bootstrap side? You're like really, I think we also overglorify the bootstrap side. Both are overglorified. Yeah. Both sides are, because you hear the war stories where they own 100% of the company and now they have total control. And the other side where it's like, the same type of outcome, but on the venture end. And I don't know. There's just so many ways to run so many different companies and capitalize them.
I didn't have a savings account until this year. And it's not like it's just a completely different mindset where it's like I wasn't looking out for myself of like I need to save money. I was like I need to go on offense always. And only now, after like 15 years of being in business and running a business that's profitable, that like, it's like when I'm like, okay, I should like hedge this and just put some money that's like completely separate from like taking bets and investing in businesses. But like, yeah, you're just not wired that way. You're like, it's like, you're not thinking like me and the business is separate. Yeah. You're just like, I want to make as much money as possible. Like, why would I put money in like a savings account when I could like put it back in the business and maybe grow the revenue of the business, when you own it like that.
I'd love to
completely different mindset.
I'd love to see the like FICO credit scores of all founders. Despite like such high polarity, where like some are so amazing because they took the bet and they kept paying it off, and then some of them are just they've got to just be, hey, I need to make cash because I have no credit. In America.
I want to talk a little bit about what it's like running your company now. So you guys have how many employees?
26.
So first of all, what is hiring like? Like when you go raise money, like it's a different lens, obviously, but like, what's the most important hire, first of all?
Definitely your co-founder. You're each hiring each other in some way. You're trying to, it is like a marriage, and you ideally know them beforehand, and ideally you're aligned on the outcome that you both want in the business. Like my co-founder and I sat down, Andy, for like 3 hours one night. I'm like, here's what we want for ourselves in our personal lives and our business lives over the next 3 to 5 years. If you're misaligned there, you'll get to the end where you either have an outcome or you want to like move on to another thing because it's not meeting expectations. And you're going to be at this crossroads where you actually like, wait, I don't even know what Jesse wants in his own life. You know, so like that is by far the most important hire. And then it just depends on the type of company you're running. It's impossible for me to say what's the most important hire. I think you just need to be really strict about culture. And when I mean strict, I mean like you're saying no to really good candidates who are not the right personality for your company. And we've kept a really amazing, lighthearted, spirited culture, but also that has a level of intensity and rigor. And that's the trade-off, right? How do you create a light, working, compassionate environment where there's still a level of intensity and rigor where it's not super nice and rainbows and everyone's leaving early and it's like the most amazing benefits in the world. There's really high ownership of the work, but it's not toxic and it's not top down on everything. And so it's more about being the co-founder and then setting the tone for the culture.
How do you get people to care about your company, like that you hire that don't own it, that aren't co-founders? Like, how do you hire the right people that are going to care and like do good work?
I'm very bullish on giving out a ton of equity to early employees. I think when you look at the cap tables of a lot of these companies, there's not nearly enough given to the founding team members, like the founding 10, and then the founding like 30 to 50. And I think you need to give really high equity exposure and be very explicit about it. And the reason a lot of companies don't is kind of what we brought up earlier, which is the founders probably overvalue the company at some point, or those employees have to buy their options at a ridiculous price. And so we're seeing on our side that the way that we're more intentional around fundraising and how we communicate equity to our employees has an amazing cohesive effect to their sense of stakeholdership and ownership. Like people feel like they're an owner of Superfiliate, and they are. You know, when this company sells or goes on to the next chapter, all the early employees can buy their first home or like invest in this thing in their life. And that's very important to us. And also we're in a time where people don't need to take a salary cut to join a startup. Depending on which startup, I think there's this perception that there's so much more risk. And I actually don't think that's the case anymore. Sure, you can go and make more money somewhere else, but on average, you're actually seeing a lot of startup salaries being hyper competitive with broader, companies in the Fortune 500.
Especially with big companies slashing and firing people and stuff now. That's the funny thing. Like everybody always pitched growing up like this kind of safe path. And it's like, it's really, nothing is safe. Like people go to school for all this time, spend all this money, then they get a safe job, and then it's like they just get fired.
And even at a more macro level, you see the turnover in the Fortune 500, and you're like, wait, the Fortune 500 is this like soup that's going, like there's a spectrum of companies that are coming off and going back on it, so companies that seemed so sure that they were going to be around 20 years ago that are doing tens of billions in revenue, some of them are no longer here.
Yeah. So you work with a lot of big companies. Who are like some of your clients?
So companies like Dr. Squatch, True Classic, Mudwater, a lot of consumables, so they're mainly in like the Shopify ecosystem. It's anything from beauty, baby, food, that type of just like CPG brand.
How do you land some of these big brands? Like I'm sure they have, there's a million SaaS products, companies pitching all these big companies. How do you become their partner for them?
In the beginning, it's just relationships. It's going to every event, hosting. We were hosting a lot of events early on and selling
to get your brand out there.
To get our brand out there for sure. I think there's the traditional sales playbook doesn't work as much anymore, which is cold outbounds, doing XYZ, probably overpaying for certain conferences and being in the right place. I think for us, we're also now thinking very content heavy. How can we tell the success stories that are very real for our customers and be a magnet for those people? And how do we create value driven content, right? So we just hired this woman, Lily Comba, who is the head of influencer at Seed Probiotic. If you know them, the gut health company, she's been amazing. And she's very close with a bunch of other amazing influencer marketing managers who run the programs at a lot of these top brands. So instead of saying, how can we get the most out of them or like go after their network, like we're going to host a webinar and it's going to be a really value add webinar around how they're walking through what they're going to do in 2024 so that other influencer marketing managers and lifecycle marketers can go and watch that. And it's, powered by Superfiliate, but we're not selling Superfiliate in that. We are affiliated with it. They see us there, but I'd rather be defining the narrative around how our economic buyer is going to be doing their job than trying to just be in their inbox and sell to them, like provide value-driven content and the magnet will come in. I say that now, it's much harder to execute on than to like actually live and get the benefits from, but we are seeing the benefits from it now.
Did you guys think about like product market fit when you start? Is that like something that you were like kind of working around?
It's my job to be laser focused on product market fit. And most of my job is spent debating where we are at, because product market fit's not something you achieve. It's this ongoing thing. I'll give you an example. You can have perfect product market fit and price yourself out of product market fit. Instagram could charge the product market fit of Instagram is outrageous, right? The amount of people in the US that are opening their phone to go on Instagram is ridiculous every day. If they just said, by the way, Instagram is going to cost you $1,000 tomorrow and you can't do anything about it, you have to pay it and log in, their product market fit goes to zero. So like pricing is also a component of product market fit. There's so many other variables there. Other things I start to think about is like product distribution fit and product utilization fit. So meaning you can invent the best product has product market fit, but if you don't have the product distribution fit, meaning the ability to distribute that product in the market, whether that's through, like for us, that would be through agencies who are helping to power those programs or influencer marketing consultants, sometimes the best product doesn't win because it doesn't get the distribution fit. And the final part of that is the product utilization fit, which is it being utilized in the way that it should, right? So I can be selling to you as the economic buyer. Maybe it was sold through an agency, so the product distribution fit is right. Are you using the product in the way that it should be? So do you have the time, energy, and effort to put into it? You may say, I really value that channel. I really value your solution, but I don't have the time to utilize it, or like I don't know the playbook to utilize it. So that's like because I'm CPO, that's like my job to be mindful of how that's moving over time and that moves with the industry. And so, yeah, I'm laser focused on that side.
Interesting. And you work with a lot of influencers. Your company works with a lot of influencers on the other side. What's something surprising that you've learned about the influencer career?
Yeah, I think the best influencers from a performance basis are the people who they don't really identify as influencers. They identify as the professionals. So let's just give an example. Let's say you're running a skincare company. The best influencers for you are probably the like reluctant content creators who are like the dermatologists in a small city that has been posting content that's been doing well, but they don't identify as an influencer. They identify as
trusted
a
source.
Dermatologist, right? It's all on trust, right? The first wave of influencers, which was like 7 to 8 years ago, where it like really started to gain in popularity, pricing was everywhere. You actually could sell products on that hype. That cycle has come and gone, right? There are people that are traditional influencers, but their ability to actually sell into their audience is very low. That's why you also see someone who's like an Andrew Huberman is a great example. I was just going to say,
he's probably the biggest of that category that you just
100%.
Said, right?
And he's like, the amount of product that he's pushing and the conversions that must be happening is outrageous, right? Like the amount of trust that he had. We were just talking about this before. I've bought a lot of things that he's recommended in the past, whether they were good for me or not, let's see. But I trust him, and I trust him as a curator and a professional curator who's doing his best job to see if, that product's going to be good for me, right? He's doing a lot of the discovery work for me and then educating me on the discovery work that he's done so that my conversion event is like him telling me to buy the product. And I go, I trust him. Like I bought an 8 Sleep from him. I was like, this sounds amazing. And it's been amazing. I love that product.
Guys like him, like I think why I trust him so much, it's like you could tell he cares first about his research and like
his integrity.
Yeah, he's not. He doesn't need to sell products. It's just presenting people his research, and then like it wouldn't be worth it for him to sell products that he didn't believe in. Like it would just be too much of a bad like. Yeah, he cares so much about his research, and so then you're like, oh, then I actually trust you. Another one is Brian Johnson.
Yeah,
like he's doing, and people kind of hate on him, and it's like, do you realize this guy is a billionaire? Yeah. Like he doesn't need your money it's not some scam to like show you his whole program and then sell you olive oil. Like his intention is good because it has to be. It makes sense that it's good. He's not trying to make money off olive oil. He has all the money, you know?
Yeah.
It's like, I trust people like that. We're just off the facts where you're like, this guy is doing experiments on himself to further science.
It's amazing.
Like, of course that's interesting.
We need,
you know?
we need these people.
Right.
know?
It's like, I'm not going to do that. You're not going to do that. Let him do that, you know?
So true.
So I think that's interesting. Speaking of all the wellness stuff, living in LA, we've both met a lot of interesting people. What have you adapted anything to your routine and your schedule as a founder that you think is
different from my old self, or different than?
I mean, you get used to things, right? So
Yeah,
it takes a second to think,
totally.
what's actually weird, but something that you think you do that's different from most of America or most of the world.
Mine is very simple. I walk so much. If there's a call that I don't need to be on my computer for, I will not be on my computer. And I will be on my phone reading and walking and that's just for me, like, I don't have a lot of the time in the day, in the morning or the night to do that. And so, like, I've just incorporated it into my life. It's very basic, but it's literally walking. And then I'm like really rigid on my sleep. I'm like, if I have meetings in the morning, but I for some reason can't sleep, and it's like 1 o'clock, I would cancel those meetings and prioritize getting 8 hours of sleep because that compounds. I used to not do that, and it used to catch up to me. And you have this like lie to yourself that you're actually being more productive because you're in there, or you do your best work at this time, and like it's just not true, at least for me. And yeah, so I've done that, and I've just been like ruthless about getting 7-8 hours of sleep.
Yeah, I've changed that a lot too. I used to like just stay up super late, wake up super early, not sleep at all, be like, I don't need to do it.
And sometimes it feels great.
That kind of
hustle
culture.
I had the breakthrough at that 2 a.m.
It doesn't last though.
Never.
It's like a few days, then you just crash.
Never.
It's not sustainable.
What about you?
Not much more on the like go to bed early. Wake up usually with no alarm early, 6:30 or 6 or whatever, and sometimes earlier. But
I will say this is like the 8 sleep is a hilarious product for people that don't know. It's a smart bed that cools down when you go to bed and then heats up to wake you up. It's not an ad. But like my sister had come to visit me and she didn't. The concept of an intelligent bed that does those things is so outrageous.
Yeah.
To someone who's never heard of the bed or the product, and it like vibrates you to wake you up. And obviously she came to LA and she was sleeping and my co-founder was out of town, and I asked him, because we were living together, can my sister stay in your room? And he's like, for sure. And he wakes up at like 4:30 in the morning. And at 4:30 in the morning, she thinks there's an earthquake because the bed is vibrating. And your first thought isn't, the bed is smart and it's vibrating to wake me up. Like there's something severely wrong. It could be
an earthquake.
Or an earthquake, or what is this? Like what's moving? So yeah, I think I've also normalized the fact that we're sleeping around IoT devices, and it's just like, there's a lot of things like that.
I mean, there's like LA is funny, like the cold plunges,
People
we were just talking about routines, like sauna every day, the red light therapy, all this kind of stuff that you sort of are used to now. And then it's like I go home or I go somewhere else and people are like, what are you talking about? Like you get in a cold bath? But yeah, I don't know my thoughts on it fully yet on all this stuff, Sometimes you just go like remove all of it and you're like, feel fine. What am I doing?
Yeah, I think it's really, you have to make sure you're doing it and then saying, do I actually feel better?
Yeah.
And then also, am I enjoying my time doing it? Because it's kind of like those studies where someone didn't eat well or whatever it was, but they had great social connections and they were really happy about it. Are you better off being happy eating food that's not good for you than eating the same food and being unhappy? Of course. Are there probably physiological changes about being happy and that food being better for your system? I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe,
Yeah. Okay. So as a founder, I mean, how do you think about money, like from a personal point of view? Are you don't care about anything else? You're all in the company, or do you also invest personally? How do you kind of think about that?
I think in the beginning I was super irresponsible. Like I was taking so much asymmetric risk that I wasn't being honest with myself on, because I was just coming from the bootstrap background. It was like, let's not fundraise. Let's not worry about taking money out. And I think it's just so bad for your brain, because you're just like going on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and you're trying to, it's actually unproductive for the business at a certain point. When we broke past that and I realized that I had been in like 5 years of just like not a sustainable space of capital and started to have some capital to play with, I was also really irresponsible, but kind of in a more fun way, where I had never had money, and
This is darkroom or Superfiliate?
yeah, it's darkroom, and like even that time, in general, it's like maybe like 6 years ago, 7 years or 5, 6 years ago. Whenever I got a certain amount of money, I would just invest it in a friend's startup, and it was like
And that was like kind of all the money you had.
it was like all the money I had. This was like super irresponsible because I thought I really like Jesse. Jesse's a really cool guy. So cool. We get to like build together and I get to be a part of it. And some of those have worked. Some of them have really not worked. And it took a couple of years of that, of realizing like, okay, this is really fun, but I'm getting older and I need to plan a little bit, and be more sustainable. And then when you fundraise, your investors don't expect you to take a huge salary cut. They expect you to get paid well because they don't want you to be distracted by not having the capital to live your life in the best way possible. That doesn't mean something outrageous, but yeah, I've just thought about, now I'm like very safe with a lot of my capital. I have like a bunch of angel investments, but I also have the majority of my money in like treasury bills, essentially, or like index funds that are on like commercial debt, that's getting 5%. And sure, I could probably invest in the S&P or pick individual companies and get a greater return. I just don't care. I'd rather take no risk there. And my asymmetric bet is on the equity of the company that I'm running. And some of the angel checks, I'm sure I would still love to do angel checks and investments opportunistically. I think it's really fun. And I think building with your friends is such a unique opportunity, and building and giving money to people that, look, if I invest in you now and this fails, I'm investing in you as a person. And for the next thing, let's work together again. So
yeah,
it is still really fun on the angel investing side.
Yeah. I like what you're doing now is kind of like the barbell thing, where it's like your main thing is really risky compared to a lot of stuff in terms of like, this thing that could go to 0 or go to 100 million or whatever. And you're kind of all in on that. And then like the other thing should be kind of the complete opposite, where it's just like cash, 5%, that's there. It's an emergency fund.
Yeah.
That's how I kind of think for myself now, where it's like, I know most of the stuff I want to do is like risky. So then don't risk the not risky part, and not even risk with money only, but with your time and your energy, right? Like it's like, people always talk about like passive income, and they're like investing in stocks or crypto or whatever. It's like your mind share is going to that. I don't care. Everyone says, no, I'm not thinking about it. Yeah, you are.
Yeah,
like,
you are.
I'm checking my shit every day. I'm like trading and like,
and you think you're making money, and you do the calculus 6 months and you're like, I made nothing.
Yeah. And even if
you made a little bit,
even if you did, it's still like, that's what you're choosing to do. And like,
totally.
Like if you have money in like treasury or like bonds or whatever, the 5% stuff now, it's like, you're literally not thinking about that. You could not look at it. There's nothing to look at. There's nothing to think about. Yeah. And so I like that strategy. But my like kind of hot take on money and investing is like, people generally say the less you have, the more conservative you should be. And I think the less you have, the more irresponsible you should be. Like if you have $10,000 in savings and your goal is to be a multimillionaire, you are not going to get there from saving and conserving your $10,000. So you should be fully on offense. Like take that 10,000 and invest in 10 startups, 1,000 each. And like, is it probably going to net you 0? Yes. But that 10,000 was not going to get you your goal anyway. So it's like, maybe one of those $1,000 checks returns you $1 million.
Yeah.
And that actually changes your life.
I think
probably not, but like, I still think it's a better thing than trying to take the 10,000 and earn 10% a year. And one day that'll be 80,000, like a million years down the line. Like if your goal is to be multimillionaire,
Yeah. It totally depends on your goal. I think in that equation, I would kind of say, like, do you have a family? When do you want to have a family?
Definitely.
How do you want to provide for them? And then what are we, like, if you're at 0 to 10,000, you should probably keep the 10,000. If you're at like 50,000 or like 30,000 and you realize and your monthly burn is just a couple grand and you're comfortable, you have to tell yourself, I'm comfortable with having this amount of months in the bank if everything falls off a cliff tomorrow. Because that's really what you're at. Because you don't want to be in that scenario, right? You want to be able to have enough where, like, this rainy day fund that's not massive, but that just answers that question of like, if I reduce my consumption habits, if something bad happens and I have some money, how long can I last and survive on? And then I think I would lean towards your camp, which is if you're not trying to have a family, you don't have to provide for other people, you're not climbing your way out of debt, then do that. I do know a lot of people that are founders that have enormous amounts of debt, whether that's from school. And so I don't know, they're thinking about, because the interest rate on their debt is so high, it's like they could pay it over the next 30 years, but they've literally paid almost 2x their principal, so there's this like, and people don't talk about the pressure, like it's weighing on an entire generation of people psychologically and emotionally in such a different way.
Yeah.
In such a different way. So it just depends on your like familial habits, what your burn is, and then also like what your relationship to debt is, then what your goals are.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. I was saying more like if you're going to talk about like saving or like investing, if you're in that mode and you just have a bit of money.
What's 5% on 10K in over 10 years, right?
Yeah. Or even within crypto stuff, like, sure, like, Bitcoin is, if you had to put money away for 10 years and like not think about it within crypto, let's say Bitcoin or ETH, those are the two like safest things. But like at this point, I don't think you're going to get rich off investing in those because like, and it depends what you define as rich. But if you put 10,000 or something, like you're not going to do 1,000x on Bitcoin within your lifetime. I just don't believe that. So like, if you're looking for that, you got to look elsewhere,
Yeah. And think about really, how would you invest $10,000 in yourself?
That's a good place to start.
And in your state of mind too. So like I would be aggressive about investing in the things that are maybe sleep oriented or like health oriented. And I actually meet a lot of people like this in LA where they're not making a lot of money, but they're making enough to like kind of push their life forward. And they invest in an asymmetric amount of money into their well-being and not even on like fringy things. They're just like getting high quality food and like buying the right mattress and like trying to get the right healthcare and consuming the right healthcare. Like I think that's amazing.
Yeah.
People should totally
Everything's an investment, and it's just hard to view things as an investment that don't return you money. But like literally like buying food that's twice as expensive, that's better for you, is an investment in your health, your energy, and that does have a return. It's just like very hard to see sometimes.
100%.
People have a hard time differentiating. But if you look at like Elon as like the most extreme examples, like I think he put, and I don't think this is smart, but he put all his money from the first exit into trying to like go to Mars and electric cars because his ambition was so big that he's like, yeah, like this means nothing. This million or whatever it was, 50 million. He's like, I want billions, which is insane. And no, I agree. Like, I think the barbell thing is perfect. You put some away, really safe. You don't have to worry. But yeah, it depends on your bill.
I'm sure he did in some way too. Like, I'm sure he had some rainy day funds. And I think.
Exactly. That's overstated too. I think.
100%.
Yeah.
And also, you get to this point where you're so well connected and you're so brilliant that there's not a single investor that wouldn't give you $10 million to start the next thing. You're just putting your own money in because you realize if you put your own money in, you maintain the more ownership over time.
Yeah.
So,
I agree though. It's a marketing thing being like, he put every dollar back in. And it's like, no, he didn't. Definitely not. And yeah, like you said, if he did, he could call any of his billionaire friends and be like, let me stay in your guest house for a month, put $5 million into my new company. So like, I agree. A lot of it's for kind of the story, but yeah, if you had $1 billion in the bank right now, what would you do differently? I was thinking about this because I'm like, it's an interesting thought exercise of like, what would you do if you had unlimited money in the bank? And then it's like, what can I actually do of that now that I'm not doing? Because I think that I need to get the money first or something.
Okay, before I would spend any of it, I'd probably call about 1,000 people, and try to talk to as many people to get advice around what I should do with that amount of money.
Okay,
because it's such a large sum of money. And then I'd probably ask myself a personal question, which is like, when I'm dead, how much do I want to pass on to my children versus how much do I wanted to like distribute or have invested in things and taken certain risks? And I'd probably then chop it up into many different buckets. Like a huge tranche of it would be for friends and family that like can help uplift them, but in a way that's not, sometimes giving money to people isn't actually what's best for them, but giving them the right amount can be really good.
Seems like a lot of heavy stress and responsibility.
A lot of, I mean, it would be super overwhelming to get $1 billion.
Like,
it would be, I'd probably have a panic attack for like an hour. And then I'd be like, actually, it happens to a lot of people that make a lot of money. They actually then develop new fears around losing that money or like these senses of like self-worth for like, am I going to like mess it up? So I would definitely consult a lot of people. And then I really I do this question a lot with $10 million with people. And I think what's really beautiful is I meet a lot of people. Better. 10 million, billion's a lot. A billion's a lot. A billion's like 110 millions. Even with 10 million, I think it's really cool when you meet people and they wouldn't change that much, and maybe they'd buy a house for themselves and for their grandma or like help out their friend that's in debt and then invest in some more things. But it's really cool when you realize we're in such a blessed place and space that we live in that our means are really met, like I definitely don't not buy things that I want to buy. And I definitely don't value other things that are very expensive, you know, whether that's the certain travel thing. I think there's, yeah, a lot of that's just so over glorifying.
I heard someone say like they would just make like on their bank app, they would just like, you know, you can just like put how much money you have sometimes, or like some of the money tracking. They would just put like whatever, $20 million and just look at it to really feel like, okay, like this is what it's going to be like. And just like you realize like not much changes. Like, okay, I have 20 million in the bank. All you're doing is looking at a number on the screen. Like after your basic needs are met, it's like, what are you actually going to do that different, you know?
And ideally you don't do it and spend it in a way where like your relationships change with the people around you that love you and you can like lift people up. But a lot of times money makes people weird. And money makes people like power begins to shift and their sense of self-worth begins to shift and they don't go in service of others and like they lose their purpose. So there's definitely the diminishing marginal returns of capital for people.
Yeah. It was honestly one of the kind of reasons I started the podcast, because I would think about that. Like, okay, if I had 100 million in the bank, like what would I do? And I'm like, I guess I would just like do the fun thing, which is like sit and talk to people about money and
That's
stuff.
Awesome.
And like, I then I was, well, you know, cause it's not like a really a good business, you know, doing a podcast. Like if you can get it really big, yeah, sure. But it's more of like a fun thing. And I was like, well, I could just do that now. Like, why do I have to wait? You know, set up the studio and it doesn't cost that much, you know, it's not. And yeah, so that's why I kind of like that, those kind of questions, just think about it. But
I love that.
But yeah, man, thanks for coming on.
Of course. It's been amazing. It's very fun. Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir. Cool. Let's do it.
So fun.